essentially, thank y'all for allowing me to zoom into the call. So I think in the process of selecting a site or making a recommendation for a site, it becomes sort of a process of elimination. I think the first site I think that should be addressed is the old hospital site. That, as y'all know, as we've talked about, that site is not controlled by the city or any of the city's subsidiaries. From the beginning of this study, the direction that we received was to study first the Richland Avenue site, and then we added a couple other sites that were all controlled by the city or the city subsidiaries. We initially, if you remember, we initially did an analysis of the hospital site without the benefit of seeing the master plan that has since been submitted to the city for a rezoning application. Once we became aware of that master plan, we looked at that master plan and included, I think, the theme of this process throughout has been one of more transparency and more inclusiveness rather than less. So I think in the spirit of being more inclusive, because several people around the community were suggesting that we should be looking at the hospital site, we did that, and we initially included it in our study. It was one of the 5 sites that was included in the evaluation that was done. Because of the lack, a couple things. One, I think that because the city doesn't control that site, it should still be disqualified from this study. If the Aiken Corporation wants to study privately held sites, then I think the Aiken Corporation should make sure that this is the only privately held site that you would like to consider. So the letter that you have in front of you suggests that that site be eliminated from the selection process only because of that. We're not commenting on the merits of the master plan. We've had a little bit of, we know more about that master plan now than we did before. In the meeting the other night, it was stated, I think I made the comment that we're not sure that the $20 million settlement funding could even be used on that site. The developer responded that he didn't need or want the money, he didn't need the money to do the development. It still isn't clear what that deal structure looks like. We've subsequently heard that there may be a conversation about donating a portion of that land to the project, or perhaps the developer build the building and sell it to the Aiken Corporation. This site continues to be an outlier as far as what that deal structure might look like. So for the purposes of our recommendation, we have set it aside and said that we don't think that it's a part of this evaluation process. We're happy to include it in the final feasibility study report. If y'all would like, we will continue to update the information in that study to be as accurate as it can be. So with that first, we then look at the 4 sites that are controlled by the city or its subsidiaries, and we believe that the Lawrence Street site and the Chesterfield site are not viable alternatives for this project to move forward. We believe that the Richland Street site and the Newberry Street site, Richland Avenue, Newberry Street, are both compelling sites for this project. They both have some pros, and they both, of course, have some cons. In the interest of moving forward with a single site recommendation that mitigates overall risk to the project, we recommend that y'all move forward with the Newberry site. I'll stop there, and I know that's a lot, and there's a lot of sort of components to that. I'm happy to answer questions or allow y'all to just discuss.
Are we allowed to use your site evaluation matrix, which is on this sheet, which is what we went over on the first Thursday, not the second Thursday?
That's the plus and minus.
Plus and minus, which you did do the plus and minus on the old county hospital site. Are we
so, are y'all able to see
Yeah.
my screen?
Right here in front of you.
Okay. We probably want to update the criteria. I'm looking back at it because we have not updated it since, the most recent information was provided. I believe that from a historic preservation standpoint, that site remains a neutral. I think sensitivity of massing and design, that's probably a neutral. Required demolition, Tracy says that demolition would not be required, so I guess that's a neutral. I understood previously that part of the hospital was gonna be demolished, but perhaps not. Site development complexity, I would still give that site a minus. There's a lot of complexity to that site. Budget impact of the site, I would likewise still give that a negative, or a minus in this structure. Availability of parking for building users, there are plans for structured parking on that site. It's unclear the financial implications of that. Structured parking, as y'all know, is expensive. The site plan that we have seen has structured parking, subterranean parking, or below the building parking, under the building that we understand could be offered to the SRNL tenant. That parking comes at a fairly significant cost, and it is not clear how the project would bear that cost. If the developer's just absorbing it, if there would be an expectation for tenants to pay for parking, that's completely unknown to us at this time. The impact.
Door.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, KJ.
It's unrelated, I'll tell you what, parked
Okay,
out on
sorry.
Whiskey Road and walk.
The impact to downtown parking would be neutral because it isn't right downtown, and so it wouldn't have a direct impact. The economic impact to downtown, we would still argue is a negative relative to the other sites. The Hotel Aiken redevelopment would still be a neutral. Walkability of the site, we still maintain that that's a minus relative to downtown. Understand that there are plans for, some other components on the hospital site. We would still argue that that's not as nice as being downtown. Accessibility to other meeting amenities, we would still give that a negative because the meeting amenities that we're referring to are downtown, and we don't know of any others that are gonna be on that site. And then office tenant criteria, again, that's at least a neutral, if not a minus, because I think the spirit of it was to be, right in town. The developer has commented that once developed, that site will be lively and mixed use, and, we wouldn't disagree with that once the site's developed, so that would either be a neutral or a negative.
Any other questions, KJ, on that side or other comments? Or we allow him to move on to the other two? All right, KJ, why don't you then go on, there's two sites remaining that you haven't addressed yet.
Yeah, so the study started by looking at the Richland Avenue site. And I think a lot of us have been involved in a lot of these conversations from a, kind of the ideal of the project of this building being kind of at the heart of downtown. There's no doubt that this site is at the heart of downtown. A lot of people, whether using it for or against the project, have identified this site as being really, really important and fundamental to the vitality of downtown Aiken. So that's a positive. I think on the negative side, it's easily the most complex site. Y'all know that there are adjacent structures that contribute to the historical fabric. There are utilities. There are just more constraints to that site that make it challenging. And I think we have heard a lot of sentiment that that site should at least be partially preserved for future hotel development, whatever that looks like, whenever that happens. If I jump to the Newberry site, it's not in quite as good of a location, but it's also, half a block or a block away. It is much more friendly to sort of development or redevelopment. There are some existing trees on the site that we need to work around, but it's a pretty straightforward site from a architectural project, construction project standpoint. So, you know, from a kind of overall risk standpoint, the Newberry site is, we think, more straightforward.
Is parking a consideration for either of these sites?
So parking for the Newberry site, will probably get between 10 and 15 parking spaces on site. There are, Buzz, I think someone counted like 30 or 35 on-street parking spaces that I think we all know are very rarely used. So there is, you know, 40 to 50 parking spaces immediately adjacent to the building. Other parking folks would just be dispersed, you know, around town as they would be. The Richland Avenue site, there was never really intended to be any parking on that site itself. It was to rely on downtown, you know, just the available parking downtown. And then if the Chesterfield site were redeveloped for a parking structure, I know there's been a lot of comments pro and con for that whole process, but that site would be, you know, really adjacent to both of those sites.
KJ, let's
Yes.
get back to parking for a second. You just said, about 10 parking spots could be available. Obviously, that's a guesstimation, until if that site is chosen, and we do the design of the building. You know, we did a thing, I don't know, a year ago, whatever, about putting some condos there and came up with a good bit of parking. Much more than the 27 initially that you said in the first thing that we saw, and now you're saying 10. Are you just being conservative on that, or how did you come up with that number? We just feel we can get more cars parked on site.
Yes, sir. We're being a little conservative in that. I think we want to manage expectations. That site, we do now have a tree survey. That site, as most of y'all know, is fairly heavily wooded on the back side of it, and there are trees throughout the site. We have not dug into the details of the tree ordinance or the details of any of those guidelines. But what we do expect is that we know that the planning director, you know, just the verbiage in the tree ordinance is that any grand tree, which there's a bunch of them on this site, that any grand tree, the planning director basically has to say, you know, there's no other alternative but to remove the tree. So I think the question will likely become, what does it mean to have no other alternative? We feel very comfortable getting 10 or 15 spaces on. We'll still have to remove trees, but taking a very, you know, sort of a very conservation-centric, you know, I think about, you know, places like Beaufort where the Publix, you know, there's 2 parking spaces in a tree and 2 more parking spaces in another tree.
Right.
You know, taking a very conservative approach, we're comfortable that we can get 10 or 15. We will explore getting more than that on site. I think it's important that that building has access to more parking. We just, because we've not dug into that, we want to be a little bit careful about that expectation. If the site were clear cut, if it were empty now or clear cut, we would be able to get more parking on it than that amount. But also the size of the building and the geometry of the consolidated parcels makes it a little hard to get to some of that land for parking.
All right, board members, any?
Well, is there not a public parking lot adjacent on the, accessible from the back of the property? A city-owned parking lot, which would be potentially
Not
available?
vehicular, it would be pedestrian wise, correct?
Okay,
Well,
so you couldn't drive through, but you could park there from another direction and then walk to the building?
Apparently,
Yeah, okay,
It's a little unclear, actually.
it is a little unclear.
Okay.
There's a right of way there, and I'm not sure how.
Well, I think there's any question, you could get a sidewalk, I'm not sure about the driveway. I mean, if you go look at it,
yeah,
where the, and I walked it the other day, It looks to me like it would be somewhat difficult to get the driveway, but, I think a pedestrian would be just as good if you could park there and walk. It's only 20 feet to the corner of the, from that parking area.
There are some
Right.
35 spaces in that lot, and there is an easement, in place that would allow ingress, egress, at least for a gate for people to park. And, I mean, it's right adjacent to the building, they could walk through and park on the other side.
Yes.
Does anybody use that parking now?
Oh, yeah.
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 You know, I don't know if this is the time to say this, but I just wanna be on the record saying this, and I possibly will say it tonight, but I think it's imperative that a community development corporation like Aiken Corporation does a project like this, more so than a private developer. Nothing against private developers. This is something, Aiken Corporation was formed to help the economic structure of downtown, education, industry within the city grid, the downtown revitalization is what I meant to say. And, you know, we have been stagnant over the years because we haven't had, you know, a lot of money in the bank, although we've been trying to help, you know, housing as we are been going. This gives Aiken Corporation a huge opportunity to do what we were charged to do with the monies that would be available from this project to continue letting us put money in the community and helping our downtown. You know, I just think that's a strong thing not to recognize. And I'm gonna stress that to city council, I think Buzz should, and, that's just how I feel. I think that this is a golden opportunity for Aiken and Aiken Corporation to even be able to move forward in projects. You know, we have things on the docket now that we would be able to fund right now, that we feel strong, you know, for the support of housing in our downtown. We used to offer free money for anybody with an upstairs, Lawrence Street property to make into an apartment, a living area.
It wasn't free, it was a grant that they paid us back.
Right, well, I mean, there wasn't,
Utilize the money and just give away.
there wasn't interest or, you know,
No,
that's
there
what I
was no
meant
interest.
by free,
All they did
so.
was pay it back, and it did work.
Sure, it
I
worked.
did 10 to 15 and.
Well, right now, we don't have the opportunity because we don't have the money.
Right.
And I think this would be a huge stepping stone for Aiken Corporation to be able to move forward and make that next step into making our downtown and Aiken a better place to live.
I don't know that could be better said. I wish that we would have had that firm of a statement before we ever included the hospital location to be assessed. We tried to appease by adding the location. Then we did evaluate the location. And at our first meeting, that location was put up for viewing. And then as an Aiken Corporation, we were asked to sit in front of that crowd and answer questions, but no one notified us that that board was gonna be removed. So now the people that we were trying to appease have a voice because in their mind, we are removing a project and we did it in the dark. We didn't
On
tell
the
them.
notes, yeah.
So I think it was an unforced error for us to have removed that board. It would not have hurt for it to sit there, even if we were gonna be eliminating it. The problem is now, city council is gonna have to answer to where that project is.
But we have a report that it was sent out, that it was analyzed.
Right?
It was analyzed. Now,
Right.
after the fact, and I went down and looked at it again last night and yesterday afternoon, and, the signs up saying for, the plan is going to, is going to city planning, right? So, I mean, I understand that, but it was analyzed. At that Thursday meeting, it was up there. We had the same list here. That's important.
I understand. As a business owner, the thing that upsets me the most is to be blindsided about anything. And I was blindsided Thursday when the question came up, where is the board? Every one of us up there turned and looked and we couldn't find the board.
Right.
No question.
I expected that everything be the same as it was on Monday, especially if in the second meeting I was gonna answer for what was said in the first meeting.
I think it could have been mitigated by the explanation that we were just given today. If that was
100%.
announced, I think it
I
would
agree.
have helped.
I agree, but there was no communication from Monday to or Thursday to the next. We have, in my opinion, opened up a difficult can of worms for city council. I think there's I'm sorry, I don't believe that there's any question to what the best site to be chosen is. Maybe the top 3 sites to be chosen, but I've talked to council members and they're concerned. And they're concerned because the communication that came out of that meeting, and they're afraid that they're gonna have a community outroar from what happened at the meeting. And I don't know how this is supposed to play out, but the most important goal here is for the labs to choose to build this project in Aiken. And I don't really know why that we can't simply do what we're tasked to do, and that is evaluate the sites that you've done and give city council 3 options to turn to the lab and say, we have given the lab 3 good options and here is our evaluation, and let them tell us which way they would like for us to go forward. That's not what
They're not
we're
gonna
gonna
do that.
Okay.
They take the position that if you build a facility that's suitable to us, then we will consider leasing it. But in terms of getting into site selection,
They don't wanna be part of that.
they're very sensitive and they're very,
All right.
they don't want any part of that.
So our recommendation to city council is 1 side?
Yeah.
From Aiken Corp to city council?
Well, that's something for this board to discuss this morning.
You know, on the hospital site, it's, the purchase hasn't gone through. We don't know how much the land would cost. There's so many unknowns in that. And the timing, I mean, this could drag out forever. How many times has the proposal on that site failed? 3 times now?
Well, not to mention, we don't know what phase they are of due diligence, and typically, you really can't, unless the keys are being passed across the table, it's not a done deal. And to commit to a site that is not a stable option, only because of that factor, regardless of the pluses, minuses, and charting, it's in due diligence. There could be something pop up during that period that nobody expected, and the deal's delayed, and the deal's delayed, and where does that leave us being tasked to find them a location in a timely fashion?
Yeah, then my recommendation would be to the board to give city council the best option. That way they're not in the debate about what happened with the hospital.
I think that's another conversation.
Well said.
I still get back to the point, the board would have been up there, right? The site was analyzed on the previous Thursday, was it not?
Yeah.
It was analyzed, the only reason why you're pulling it, because it doesn't meet this other criteria. Well, we added it because we want to be transparent.
I agree.
Well, if we can at least use the study that you, whether you call it preliminary, whatever,
Yep.
we say it was right here. We'll make our decision based upon this report that we have. Now, if the city wants to delve into it more than what we have, we use this, that's what we're gonna use. We're gonna say, this is it.
I agree.
Then bring out the 5 things and say, this is what we looked at.
I agree. This would have been such an easy conversation if the board were there, or it would have either been announced at the beginning of the meeting that the hospital site has been eliminated. But it wasn't that, it was the
I said in the meeting, I
attendance.
didn't have the mic, when it all came up, I said, we did analyze the site.
100%.
It was-
Everyone knows we analyzed it.
It was the principle of the board, the physical board, just not being there.
Well, to be clear about that, I mean, I don't wanna throw KJ under the bus, they've done a great job, but that was, none of us knew that it wasn't going to be there. I think KJ, for reasons that, KJ, you wanna speak to that, just, you,
Yeah, I mean, I apologize in the miscommunication. The conversations that I remember us having were what I stated, that because it was a completely separate kind of a deal, that it was not gonna be considered, that it wouldn't be recommended. You know, my removal of that board from the grouping should have been more clearly communicated and discussed, rather than us just, you know, decide that was gonna happen. We have been saying, I think unforced error is a great term. You know, unfortunately, this is a project that folks are already just waiting to make a circus out of anything. It didn't look great that y'all didn't have the right answer to that question, but the answer still remains, the study isn't over. We did study the site, we're continuing to study, y'all are continuing to study the site. That site continues to evolve. The other sites, everybody knows more or less what we're getting into. That site, there was one speaker that said, that site doesn't need the $20 million. 2 speakers later, somebody referred to the $20 million and how it would be given in a way that it would work. And now there's a discussion about you can have an acre of the land, or you can buy an acre of the land. You know, these evaluation criteria, with the changes that I've made, that I've stopped sharing, but I'll reshare, you know, those stand for the project. You know, the decision is, do y'all want to embark on a project that is on city-controlled property, or do you want to embark on a project that involves a developer? And if it involves a developer, should there be other developers considered? Is that the only site that you want to consider? So all the criteria are there. You know, Tracy's going to disagree with our evaluation. You know, everyone thinks their baby's prettier than the next. But you know, these are the criteria that we've used to evaluate all the sites, and we stand by those. And the decision has not been made, the recommendations have not been made. So we're just gonna have to keep saying that, and y'all are making a recommendation based on this information. I believe that the structure of the deal is probably just as important as the attributes of the site. Again, you know, that site has some merits, it's got a lot of drawbacks, but probably the biggest issue is that there are so many unknowns. But the information here, it'll be in the report, and it'll be part of the basis of y'all's recommendation.
I'd like to bring your attention to the mixed-use project feasibility study, public meeting, and the project overview. Second paragraph, the new facility was targeted to serve as a workplace for 75 to 100 jobs to be located on land owned by the city of Aiken or a corporation in the heart of downtown. So, that says it, right?
Looking forward.
And that's what we've all been trying to say politely, and maybe the mistake was looking at the site at all, because it never met the criteria
Correct.
of the study in the first place.
I think what Norman said is our effort to be transparent causes the appearance that we were not being transparent. And that was an embarrassment to me. I expressed that to Buzz on Friday. Several of you saw an email I sent. I don't think it was handled right. I hope we don't pay a price for it, but what's done is done.
Your work is still good. If we are gonna do a single site recommendation, this problem solves itself in many ways. If we do more than one site, that's the board's decision.
I do think it's important to use the study that he did. I agree. Now, the board was sitting down, some of us said, we did analyze it. We did analyze it, correct? Now, the board should have been up, no question about that. But does that, and what's gonna probably happen, I've sat on city council, and they're gonna say, well, let's really, really study this site. Well, You see what I'm saying? But if, either they gotta make the determination, is that what they asked for, made a difference,
Right,
you know?
yeah.
Okay. I think we just have to do our job and analyze it and go from there, that's all we can do. But I do think we need to give a recommendation. I mean,
Oh, there's no question.
basically, when he was hired, we would like to have your independent and tell us what you think, and that's what he's doing.
Yep.
And they can criticize him for not putting the board up, but,
But we're here now, and it's time to make a recommendation to city council,
I think it'll overwhelmingly be one side.
no question.
I'm curious. I'm curious, I may make a fool of myself, but,
It's a first for everything.
but I know, there's no first for everything. But I think some people will be surprised, I think, by our recommendation as well, surprisingly.
let me ask a question. When we present this, will the board be up tonight?
No,
I don't know why I would be.
Yeah, why would you put something up that you don't recommend?
Well, why? I mean, we're saying this is what we did, it's all about transparency, right?
Well, it is, but isn't it transparent that we voted on one side? Because the board
I think
is
it's no problem
out.
with saying these were the sites that were considered, and it was analyzed, and this is the site, look, we wanna be transparent.
But didn't we give the public ample opportunity to view those twice, like?
We're gonna
And
give,
if
you want
they're-
transparency, give them a third.
But if you want chaos, give them
Wait,
5
go on.
tonight, when
Excuse
we
me.
already give a
Excuse me,
recommendation.
there is going to be chaos. I'm not kidding you, and because, think about it, there's gonna be chaos, y'all pulled it because you didn't want it shown.
Do we wanna bring the fuel?
Well, like, if they have a board up, so what are you talking about?
Look, council asked us to hire a firm to do this study and recommend a location. And I think that's what we should do tonight, period.
I agree.
We have done our dotting of the i's and crossing of the t's. Have we done it perfect? Probably not, but I think we've given it a good college try, and I think we have a good recommendation, and I think we should recommend one site. You know, it's, government has a hard time deciding where they're gonna eat lunch.
Right.
And if you give them too many options, it won't come out.
I
Let's
think
give
it's
them-
important to say too, that our recommendation is based on the criteria we were given
Correct.
initially.
Sure, absolutely.
And I mean, we're doing what we were asked to do.
Sure, absolutely.
What council does after our recommendation is.
But didn't we
the council's
go,
decision.
didn't we go above and beyond by including the hospital site?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Right.
That's all we gotta say, is it was considered, and they got that,
Oh, they saw this.
and what it was considered.
I think
They were there
to
Thursday
Norman's
night.
point, it's about keeping it simple from this point forward.
No
Keeping
question.
it direct and simple, and just being transparent about what we were tasked with and speaking to that. And if other energies wanna come into the conversation to cloud that and say, what about this, what about yesterday, what about last year? We need to keep the train on the tracks, because we have to move forward, not look
Great.
back.
Yeah.
All right, Chairman.
Okay. Well, I mean, what I'm hearing around the table is that there seems to be a consensus that we move forward tonight with a recommendation to the Newberry Street site. Is there anybody who doesn't agree with that? Well, I think we need to take a vote on this, or,
Need a motion, don't you?
well, one thing I need to say, nobody, the Newberry Street site is adjacent to my law office. No one has even remotely suggested to me that it benefits me, but out of an abundance, and I don't think it does, actually. I think it might make my
You might wanna
problem.
move.
I think it might make it worse. But out of an abundance of caution, if that's the vote that we're going to take, I'm going to abstain, just, so I don't add any more fuel to the fire.
Good idea.
Okay.
And I'm gonna abstain because my bank holds the mortgage on the property.
Okay.
All right.
And I'm gonna say, because I don't take the heat like.
You've been in too many of these
I'm not
things.
gonna abstain. No.
That's a voice of experience right there.
Anybody else have Somebody that was a relative on this property years ago or something.
Well, personally, I'd like to make a motion that we recommend the Newberry Street site, for this project on the recommendation of McMillan and Constant. And Smith. And, I think it's a wise choice. I feel by picking Richland Avenue that we're devaluing the property of the hotel
Yes.
for future use, and, that's my motion.
I'll second.
Mr. Chairman, if I could make one suggestion, I think that something that's come up consistently throughout this discussion, and just to help my bosses with the city, is the level of commitment from the laboratory, and if you would consider making any motion about a recommendation, that it be contingent upon arriving at a commitment, a demonstrated commitment from the lab.
There's no
Before
doubt.
we progress any further.
That's a given.
Amend the motion to say that, though.
Sam, you wanna amend the motion?
I amend the
Contingent.
motion to, on the contingency that the lab does, agree with
But
this,
we're,
obviously.
all we're doing is make a recommendation as to the site. We're
That's
not
correct.
making a recommendation or any commitment to move forward at this time.
Correct, that is correct. Is the motion clear?
Okay.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
All right.
Opposed? Abstained? So, what was the number on that? Anybody counting?
Everybody but two.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Okay. All right. And that's everything on my agenda. Is there any other discussion, anything we need to bring up at this point? I hope I'll see y'all again tonight. I hope you'll all speak, because I don't plan to be the only one speaking tonight. No?
Yes, sir.
You good?
Yes, sir.
All right, then we're adjourned.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.